Is this a good volume?
what you already know. I hate myself when I let you let go. 'Cause I don't care what you said to me when you said you needed to breathe. And now I'm all alone. Where did you go? Where did you go? I'm all alone. Won't you come back home? I miss the way that you hold me. I miss the way that you feel. I miss the way that you touch me. So real. I miss the way that you hold me. I miss the way that you feel. I miss the way that you touch me. So real. You hold me. I miss the way that you feel. I miss the way that you touch me. So real. Hey. Yeah, yeah. Na, 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 na. Oh, so real. So real, 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 so real. So real. So real, so real. So real, so real. So real, so real. So real. So real, so real. So real.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the final day of AstriCon 15. And I'd like to introduce the ever-smiling, the bulletproof, the stain-resistant David Duffett.
Thank you very much. Last day already. Oh, boy, happened so quickly. Saw lots of people having fun yesterday, lots of great sessions, and of course we've got more great sessions today. But I've got a couple of housekeeping things to tell you. First of all, lunch. Lunch is not going to be in the same place as yesterday. It's going to be out of here and to the right, so down the other end of this place. I forgot the name. Somebody will, I'm sure, tell me the name. Where's Tesh? What? Grand Salon. The room's called the Grand Salon. Dangerous Demos. James, would you care to stand for a moment? Dangerous Demos, as sponsored by Cloudonics.io. James has 5 slots to fill on the Dangerous Demos. And if you want to do a tech check, if you come back to this room from 11 o'clock onwards, you can check your laptop and things against the projectors and stuff like that. The other thing that is always important at AstriCon, something we love to do, is to recognise community members for their contributions. We recognise the whole community coming together, but every now and again you get somebody that's extra active on the forums or contributing in some other way. And so I wonder if we've got a John Kinniston in the house. Do we have a John? We do have a John Kinniston in the house. Come up, John. Come and say hello. Let's bring, actually, to save you coming all the way around, let me give you a little prize. These prizes are very cool. What they are is a stick PC, size of a USB stick, complete PC, terminates in an HDMI, and we would just like to recognise you and say thank you very much for your contribution, John. Thank you, We'll get a little photograph afterwards if we may. Thanks a lot. Well done, that, John. And John's very active on the forums in helping people out. Another community member who's travelled all the way from Russia is one Igor. Igor, how are you doing? Come up and say a quick hello. Same thing for you. Thank you very much, Igor. Well done, that man. Igor is the maintainer and the creator of Chan Unistim.
No, not creator.
Oh, sorry, maintainer of Chan Unistim. So if you've ever had the pleasure of connecting one of those Nortel Unistim devices to Asterisk, that's thanks to Igor. Well done. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll get a photo afterwards if we may. Good. Okay, I think that's it. Of domestic arrangements. It's so many people, so many new faces and so many old faces. And I'd just like a little show of hands. Whose first time is it to AstriCon today? Or this time? Excellent. Okay. Who was at the very first one in 2004? I've got one hand at the back. Got a hand over there. Where was the 2004 one? Atlanta. Where was the 2005 one? Anaheim. 2006? Dallas. Should we go through all of them? Well, 2007? Carefree, Arizona. Scottsdale, yeah, we could go through them all. You can measure it by the number of AstriCons you've been to, the amount of time you've been in VoIP, how much hardware was when you started in this game. My personal favourite is how much of your life has been wasted waiting for Telecom phones to reboot. That's my favourite. Of course, in fair play to Telecom, they have got new firmware and it does load up a little bit more quickly now. So anyway, just a little bit of fun. Remember to give your feedback on all the sessions. If you're using Sked on your phone, there's an ability to give feedback on each and every session. We value that feedback. It's very, very important to make AstriCon even better the next time round. And also, you will get a feedback email after the event, as you do with these kind of events. I know it's very tempting to just leave it, but the more feedback you give us, the more optimized we can be. Who enjoyed the keynote yesterday? Excellent. We've got another cracking keynote for you now. We've got none other than a very special lady in open source, Miss Deb Bryant. Deb is Senior Director of Open Source and Standards in the Office of the CTO at Red Hat, no less. So give her a very warm AstriCon welcome. It's Deb Bryant. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Hey, good morning, people of AstriCon. And good morning to the folks that are dropping in by streaming. So if you read the abstract in the program, which I did a couple of days ago, you may get the impression that I'm giving a technical session. Someone rewrote the abstract. But I want to change your expectations because what I'm really here to talk about is community and the businesses of open source and some of the history of telecom and the influences of open source. So I hope that's okay with you because it's always better to talk about things that you know the best and that are closest to your heart. I have the good fortune of working at Red Hat with a lot of people who are deeply experienced in all of the technology, and I learn a lot from them every day. In telecom, there are really two major waves of disruption in the last 15 years or so. The first one was the advent of the internet and voice over IP. That shook things up a bit. And then the second came as we started changing the way we were thinking about networks and managing networks and hardware. And both of these big changes are really driven and fueled by open source. And so open source development, open source communities became very important. Very briefly, my job at Red Hat is to make sure that the communities that Red Hat relies upon for their commercialized products and support thrive. So I've been working in open source communities for a couple of decades. And when Red Hat came to find me, it was kind of hard to say no, they wore me down. But I think I have the best job in the company, but don't tell my boss. My entry into the telecom industry was in the cowboy days of the competitive local exchange carrier times. I was the vice president and general manager of the internet subsidiary of a publicly traded telecom that ran a CLEC. And I learned a lot in that period of time. It was an interesting industry. There are still some survivors, but as we found out over time, the way those companies were built and the measurements they were built upon and the craziness of the relationship between the local exchange carriers and what investors expected as a return turned into quite a train wreck, and I don't think it was the value that consumers were hoping. So I learned a great deal during that time, and I fled and went to the public sector where no one would ruin your stock and break the hearts of the shareholders. I spent a number of years thereafter. I worked in Oregon state government as Oregon's deputy state CIO. I served on the OSI, the Open Source Initiative Board, for 6 years. I just finished a 6-year term about a month ago. I also worked with a number of nonprofit entities whose mission is to use open source to do good things like improve our voter system. I also worked at Oregon State University's Open Source Lab, and there I got to meet the Linux kernel, and I got to learn what open source communities need to thrive, to help with infrastructure. OSL is still there, hosting really high-impact community projects like the Drupal project, Apache Foundation, Linux Foundation's infrastructure, all lives there, and it's run by students mostly. I wanted to talk a little bit about what was happening in Oregon because it really was a kind of a stewing pot or a catalytic series of events that actually fueled and supported a lot of the changes we saw show up in telecom. In 1999, the Linux Technology Center that IBM ran was there. That was run by Dr. Daniel Fry, who was VP of Open Systems at IBM. And he had about 150 engineers who were working full-time on the Linux kernel. Intel had their Open Technology Center. They were a little bit quieter. They had a strategic partnerships with a couple of companies, and they were a little bit more tender about talking about open source publicly at the time, but great contributions. The Open Source Development Lab was created in 2000. It later became the Linux Foundation, what the Linux Foundation is today. I mentioned OSL. We also had an incubator center called the Open Technology Business Center that was there as an economic development and a number of other assets. And AstriCon, the open source conference, is run there for a number of years too. The Linux Foundation was formed by all the big players who wanted to be able to count on Linux to develop their own technology roadmap against it. So it was originally created to support the Linux kernel project. But over time, they found that there were other large projects worth supporting. Now I'm going to tell the big guy stories and the little guy stories because they're both important, and the confluence of these communities becomes really important as we talk about development in open source and telecom. Oregon actually had a fairly unique culture. Oregon in 2000 was the state that had the highest number of small businesses in the United States. There were more small businesses than any other state. We had fewer really large companies were headquartered there. So we had a lot of entrepreneurism, we had a lot of individual contributors, we had a lot of independent software developers that had no problem getting work. If you had skills, you had work. One of my favorite projects that was an open source project was called the Personal Telco Project, and it still exists today. But before the day where every coffee shop in town and every hotel lobby in town was providing internet access, the Personal Telco Project was a group of volunteer network engineers that went to the coffee shop and said, if you buy the equipment and you pay for the bandwidth, we'll come in and install and configure and help you maintain this. And they created this great network. So this also fed the independent culture of the remote work folks too. But it was a great asset for Portland, and they became somewhat famous for having the most open access internet. They also hit the national news when Starbucks deployed their own private for-pay network and shut down the local node. It was kind of fun. It ended well, but it was exciting for a time. Also, Asterisk has some roots in Portland. The original community manager, some of you may remember John Todd, is from Portland. Also out of that open source ethos. I exchanged emails with him a couple of days ago, and he's got a nonprofit he's running doing security. And really in the spirit of a lot of the small independent projects we see in Portland. So in the meantime, Linux Foundation is still minding their own business doing Linux, but they've discovered a niche, a very large niche, and created the carrier grade Linux project to help the telecom industry be able to adopt and start using Linux in their own environment with their own specifications. So this is really the first very large open source project that was related to telecom. At the same time, in the meantime, I was working for the state of Oregon as the deputy CIO, and someone introduced a piece of legislation requiring all state agencies to use open source software before they could even consider opening a procurement for something else that was proprietary. And it was kind of startling for the government there. They'd never heard of open source. I was probably one of the few people that had. But in the process of discovering what was behind it, one of the things I did was I went out and did a survey. And I asked agencies, are you using, I know what open source is, are you using open source? Well, we found out that the Department of Transportation actually was running Linux on their mainframes. We had actually a lot of open source. So we had a good answer for the legislature, and it was a terribly written bill, but it brought a lot of attention to the notion of deploying open source in government. And that was the beginning of my career of suddenly becoming the world's expert in open source. That was what I'd spent a lot of years doing, was helping national and state governments adopt open source. You just have to know a little bit more than someone else to be able to help. This is also, I want to mention that the state of Oregon is a unique place in that they were in control of their own destiny in telecom. They operated their own telephone switches. They had their own fiber in the ground, although they were prohibited from using it, so they didn't compete with the telecom. They had major points of presence all over the state. Oregon's fairly distributed. They have a lot of small areas. And the legislature recognized this as a public asset. And so within the Department of Administrative Services, where I worked, was created a data, video, and voice group that, as part of their charter, created internet access for Oregon citizens in any city where there wasn't commercial internet available. This was fairly groundbreaking, but it was a great use of public funds. It was a great use of extending the state's network. And it also enabled them to think a little bit differently about how they deployed it. In the 90s, the state adopted an open standards policy in the video, voice, and data section, and so they would not procure anything that didn't adhere to an open standard. This made for some lively and engaging conversations later with some vendors that I won't mention the name of because we want to be polite, but I'll tell you some stories anyway, it'll be fun. One of the things that happened while I was at state, and then after I left state service, I asked the team to write up a white paper, was the deployment of the Asterisk server. So this was my introduction to Asterisk. There was a state agency who ran administrative hearings that by law needed to be scheduled, recorded, reposed, and archived in a public way so they became part of the public record. They ran about 500 hearings a week. And the software that was being used, the system that was being used to do this, was a piece of one-off proprietary software that some guy somewhere in Oregon had written and was running. And it cost the state about $150,000 a year to license. And then later on top of that, they were paying for long-distance calls because they bore the cost of public who were using these. Administrative hearings for things like, I'm contesting the fee, the Department of Agriculture shouldn't have charged me for this, I don't want to have my fine here. It was a range of topics. But there were a lot of regulatory issues around how this was all done. So they went to the team at the state, and I will say this is probably a very early version of DevOps because we had the developers and the guys running operations for the video and voice and data networks all working together. And they asked if they could help. So what they did was they grabbed an Asterisk server, and actually John Todd was helpful and instrumental in helping that project get done in the state of Oregon. They used the state network, they used voice over IP, so they eliminated the long distance calls, they eliminated the proprietary software licensing fee, and it took, it was a level of effort, it was $10,000 worth of hardware and about 6 months of part-time effort for a team of 4 or 5 guys. It was a great success story, and I had a lot of fun watching it. We also started beta testing SIP phones, and so in my home in Portland, I had a SIP phone on my desk. It was fun. Very creative. Now, I also want to mention that we were approached by a proprietary vendor who wanted to give us equipment to run voice over IP. And we had a brand new state CIO who was chosen for his background in state government, but he didn't necessarily have that much experience in technology. And so this was one of his first meetings, week one, and we were pitched on the idea of doing this, and we actually rejected the notion because the operating system that the proprietary vendor ran on, we felt was inherently insecure, so we favored open source, and we got to stick to our standards because we had a policy. So in 2005, we started to see the world change for telecom. The Economist talked about the acquisition of Skype for a lot of money, and it became apparent that voice over IP was actually going to be a thing, and the internet was going to start really changing the way telecom thought about how they would practice their business. So the next wave at the Linux Foundation was the creation of projects that would support telecom's strategy to try to change their approach to the industry. So now they have really no way to pivot and compete with the folks that were using the internet. So they had to figure out how they would be able to accelerate and change. Open Daylight was the first project, and Linux Foundation, because they had a history of successfully governing these large enterprise projects, was approached. Red Hat was one of the first companies to join. We were already a longtime member of Linux Foundation because, well, we're a Linux company. But we weren't a telecom company. And in 2009, we didn't have any stake in any what you call vertical markets. Red Hat has traditionally done software development and focused on customers across the software needs of data centers and not necessarily for a vertical market. So this is the first time. We were approached by Telecom, and they said, here's the deal. We know we need to do open source. We don't know how to do it. Linux Foundation's leading the effort for governance and for the project, but we don't actually know how to collaborate. So we spent a great deal of time, and we still work with traditional telecoms who don't know. I mean, if you think of the history of telecom, they know how to share networks. They've been collaborating for a long time, but they've never co-created software, and they've never created much software to begin with. So this is a huge, huge change and a real challenge, and it's been a pleasure and an interesting process to work with some of the telecom giants and create things like onboarding training for engineers so they can understand how to work in the upstream. You know, how to be a citizen. What are the tools? What are the applications? How do you do that? It comes naturally for you. You get it. You're working in open source. But imagine being a legacy vendor, and for the first time, you know that if you can't just open your checkbook, you have to be in the kitchen when the soup is being made. You have, if you want to influence the project, you have to put some engineering resource into it. So Red Hat suddenly found themselves in the middle of helping the telecom industry, and now we have a stake too. So that's the history. Let's kind of roll forward into some current things. So a couple of years ago, Russell Bryant did the keynote. Did anybody see that? Remember Russell? So Russell Bryant worked for, we're not related. Russell Bryant worked for Digium for a time, and he now works with me in the office of the CTO, and he's our OpenStack expert, and he also does a great deal of work with Telecom. I asked him for a nutshell of what some of the current disruptive projects are and what the kind of problems we're solving. He talked about NFV and SDN, and also the physical network devices being treated like other servers is an interesting problem for Red Hat to solve because we have a lot of engineers working on those kinds of problems. Linux Foundation came out with a survey recently. I wanted to share this with you because if you don't already know, open source is sort of one in networking. 98% of the communications provider are confident open solutions can achieve the same level of performance as networking solutions. That is a huge sea change. If you think about it, a decade ago, no one would have believed that you could bet on open source. Although, because I came from internet, I was pretty comfortable with it because we relied on it for production, even before it was called open source. 69% are using open source networking solution in production networks. That's an exciting stat, too. I like it. We're also finding a trend where telecoms are starting to create their own formal capacity to develop their open source strategy, and they're starting to create open source program offices. Now, this survey was done by a working group I participated in the Linux Foundation. That's a group of people that lead open source program offices. And two of the members are Telecoms, Huawei, and Comcast, both participate in this group that helped do the survey. But they were finding an increasing number of people. Now, Red Hat has been doing this since we were created as an open source company. The Open Source and Standards group that was just created about 5 years ago, because we found engineers are really busy trying to get things done, and sometimes they need help, or, and support, reminding that they need to be involved in communities, and we support those efforts. So everyone in here knows about DevOps and CI and CD. The essential message there is that this is all about open source. The kinds of innovations we're seeing, the kinds of tools and applications we're using are open source. And it's creating a change in the developer community. It's creating a change with the relationship between the developer and the business owner or the business leadership, where the developer has just become critical in the way we're starting to do software development, and they're starting to pick their own tools and drive their own. I also will add a comment that this is where security comes into in modern network development and security. We also saw a survey recently that talked about developers driving the choice of cloud platforms. And I think you could extend this idea to be having an influence on architecture, network design, and other areas that developers have traditionally been sort of sequestered from. If you're in a corner, do your thing, talk to the procurement officer, we'll give you the tools, we'll have licensed tools. And instead, they're starting to pick the platforms, they're picking the tools, and open source has been an enormous enabler of that. And the benefit to the company is developers now engaged and moving faster. I want to encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to read a book, a small book that Stephen O'Grady wrote recently called The New Kingmakers, and it describes this phenomena of the relationship of the developer inside of a company changing and how important they are to the business, not just in creating a software that you're commercializing, but in creating a competitive advantage within the company to remain relevant, really. I also wanted to mention that AI is now rising specifically in network and telecom technology. The Deep Learning Foundation, also yet another foundation, but a new foundation was created under the Linux Foundation umbrella. AT&T contributed significant amount of code to that project, to the Acumus AI project, which is focused on creating a marketplace for AI applications and network plays big in that. I also want to say, though, with AI, is that I think it's exciting and interesting, but I also really have a cautionary comment. We really need to be mindful about what we're doing and where we're going with AI. I think in the news this week, Amazon announced that they were going to stop using AI to filter their job applications. They discovered that the filter, we were starting to hear about bias being built in. So if you have human beings helping machines learn, what we're doing is we're institutionalizing and automating our own biases, and that was really not the benefit we were looking for. Amazon stopped using their own system to filter resumes because they were filtering out women. They were filtering out women because the word women didn't show up in any of the applications they had the 10 years before that for engineers that they had hired successfully. So if someone had the expression, I am the lead of the women's chess club, then their resume was thrown out. So anyway, I'm not trying to pick on Amazon, but it's a great case where you'll understand that the bias can be built in as unintended. You get unintended consequences. So it's going to take some time before we really understand what AI will do for us. We do know there's an implication for businesses. We do know in a certain sense, we should be able to optimize our networks, but we can't take the human equation out of what we're doing with the data. So why am I telling you all this? Because I think you're in an open source ecosystem and you understand a lot about open source, but my encouragement really is to double down on open source. If you're in the Asterisk ecosystem, I encourage you to participate in other projects. If you're a manager, I encourage you to make sure that your developers are empowered to do more in open source, do more with open source. We have a number of practices at Red Hat that I think have uniquely created the opportunity for the company to remain as a good citizen in the open source community. So as an example, if we have an engineer that comes to Red Hat and they have their own email address on GitHub, we don't ask them to use a Red Hat email. We're not trying to create vanity statistics to get credit for how many people are contributing in projects. What's important to us is that our engineers can work in the community, with their own identity, to contribute shoulder to shoulder with other folks in the community. That's where meritocracy comes in, that's where collaboration comes in. And I'm really proud of the way that Red Hat works with its developers and empowers them. It makes for a great environment for engineers to work. And it benefits us because we strengthen the ecosystem. If that engineer leaves, they leave with their identity, they leave with their good work and reputation, and we continue to have a great relationship ongoing. The mindset, I will say the challenge, DevOps and everything, if you haven't already shifted the way you're doing software development, you should be looking at it now. If you're not doing it, find a peer in another company, ask them for help. There's a cultural mind shift that's really needed, and sometimes it takes being able to go into another organization, maybe with a manager who understands how they've implemented their own company. But it's huge, and we just need to do it. I also would encourage you to apply open practices in your organization. That's a whole other talk. But really what we're talking about is extending the idea of the virtues and values of open source, openness, meritocracy of ideas, transparency. These things are not easy, but they give us the greatest benefit, and it makes for a great company. There's a whole book written about that. And really, that's my comments. A little time if you have questions or discussion, but I appreciate having an opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you very much,
Yeah,
Deb.
thank you.
Stay on board. Thank
Okay,
you for
sure.
sharing your wisdom and your experience. We appreciate that. And
Sure.
are you happy to take some questions?
Sure.
In that case, we can open the floor, and we probably have a mic runner. We've got one over there with Ahmad to start with. Can somebody get a mic to Ahmad there, please? Thank you. Oh.
Hi. Since GitHub is owned by Microsoft now, does Linux Foundation any program to establish something similar to that?
So, it's interesting. I had a colleague visiting the European Union next week, and he wanted to know if Red Hat had, I don't do the official position, but he asked me if Red Hat had a position or a concern to convey. And I have to say that, first of all, I think that Microsoft is now in the spot of having to be a good steward of GitHub. We have an escape valve. It's called GitLab. So it's not that it couldn't be recreated. The easier thing is to keep what's already going. People like to work where the community is. There's so much transparency involved that I'm not concerned. So as far as I know, no one has a plan to do something different. We're just going to expect good behavior, and we'll watch how that works. And if something changes, I'm sure that Red Hat and other companies would be happy to help remedy. But right now, we're confident. We have a level of confidence that it's going to work well. Thank you. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Who's our next question person? I've got to be mindful, but is that one over there, or is that just a gentleman looking at something? Okay. Yes, it's difficult to see from the stage with the old spotlights here. Okay, all right. Well, are you going to be able to stick around for a little bit, Deb,
Yes.
if people want to come up and say hello? All right, I do want to remind you, folk, of the feedback that you need to give on everything in the conference. It's all available on Sked, I should say, on your application on your phone or via the internet, astricon2018.sked.com. Remind you that lunch is in the Grand Salon. Remind you about dangerous demo participation. And by the way, there are some amazing prizes, a Google Pixel phone, AirPods, I know, it's very exciting, isn't it? iPads, Adreno dev kits, they're all there for the dangerous demos. That very special mix of high adrenaline, high octane, run by a British man, so it must be good. And the chaos that is the dangerous demos. That's this afternoon in this very room, by the way. And if you want to check against the AV, then that's from 11 o'clock onwards. So with that, if you'd like a photo with Deb or a question with Deb, that's available after this. And the guys, Igor and John, if you can come over for a photo as well, that'd be very much appreciated. But I'll see you all at the dangerous demos. We've got great content. There is a talk on machine learning that's going to be going on fairly soon. So with that, thank you very much. See you all later. And a special thanks to Deb again. Good afternoon. How are you all doing? Woo! Are you ready for a very, very exciting AstriCon? Of course you are. I'll just try that again. Are you ready for a very exciting AstriCon? Yes, of course you are. As you know, something quite momentous has happened a few weeks ago, and it's drawn a level of attention that is very exciting for everybody concerned. We've had all sorts of people come out of the woodwork to AstriCon that haven't been for, at least 3 or 4 years. And so it's good to see everybody along. My name's David Duffett. I'm the Worldwide Community Director. Very excited to be here. And we thought, given that this is an open source community of transparency, we would have an Ask Them Anything panel. And for historic reasons, I quite like the idea of ATA as the kind of set of initials for it. I thought that would work very nicely. Just a side note. Anyway, what I'd like to do is welcome up to the stage some key people from both Sangoma, the acquirers, and Digium, the acquirees, or however you might say that. And we're going to then open the floor to questions from you, where you can literally ask anything. There are certain parameters, and Tony will explain some of that when he comes up. In fact, let's get him up first. It's Tony Lewis, COO of Sangoma. Have a seat. Have a seat, Tony. Okay, and then, all right, and then we'll get Matt Fredrickson. No, we're saving that special pronouncement, Matt. Matt Fredrickson, the lead for the Asterisk project. Matt. Closely followed by Brian Walters, VP of Software Engineering at Sangoma. And then if you look very carefully at the slide, you'll see they got Matt Jordan's name slightly out there. It's Matt Jordan. Welcome. CTO. Matt is the CTO at Digium. And so what I'd like to do is just allow these gentlemen to introduce themselves so that you can hear from them, and then we'll just go straight into open questions. So Tony, you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name's Tony Lewis. I'm with Sangoma Technologies. I'm the COO at Sangoma. I oversee support, engineering, pretty much everything but marketing and finance. I'm happy to be here. I've been to AstriCon for, 10 years now. We're going to go through and ask us anything. We're going to try to be as transparent as we can. One thing I do want to say is a little different for the community inside of Asterisk is Sangoma is a publicly traded company. And as a publicly traded company, we have to be careful what we do, what's called selective disclosure, which means we can't come to a group here and disclose something big that we haven't disclosed to the markets first. So there may be some questions you might ask, probably not, but if you do, we may have to say, I'm sorry, we can't talk about that. We're going to try to be as transparent as we can, but as a public company, we do have some regulations that we have to follow. So beyond that, we're trying to be open here.
Okay, thank you. Ask Them Anything panel. And for historic reasons, I quite like the idea of ATA.
Engineering, pretty much everything but marketing and finance. I'm happy to be here. I've been to AstriCon for, 10 years now. We're going to go through and ask us anything. We're going to try to be as transparent as we can. One thing I do want to say is a little different for the community inside of Asterisk is Sangoma is a publicly traded company. And as a publicly traded company, we have to be careful what we do, what's called selective disclosure, which means we can't come to a group here and disclose something big that we haven't disclosed to the markets first. So there may be some questions you might ask, probably not, but if you do, we may have to say, I'm sorry, we can't talk about that. We're going to try to be as transparent as we can, but as a public company, we do have some regulations that we have to follow. So beyond that, we're trying to be open here.
Okay, thank you. Matt.
All right, my name is Matt Fredrickson, and I worked at Digium since about 2001, so for a number of years. I'm currently the head of the Asterisk project. I inherited that from Mr. Jordan a few years ago, and it has been a delight being able to work more intimately and closely with the Asterisk community. I've enjoyed that a lot. For those of you that haven't met me already. And I have recently learned about this public disclosure knowledge thing as well, selective disclosure thing. And so I'm learning about how it applies to my job as well, which is complicated. Anyway, thank you all for coming today.
I'm Brian Walters. I'm VP of Software Engineering at Sangoma. Some of the things that I oversee there is the Free PBX project, PBExec, Zulu, UC, if anyone's used that. I've been involved with Free PBX and Asterisk since about 2007. Some of you guys I know, a lot of you I don't. If not, come to our booth and say hi.
Thank you.
Matt Jordan, CTO at Digium, now part of Sangoma. Really happy to be able to say that, actually. It's really cool. For a long time, as Matt F. alluded, we always have to say Matt F., by the way, because there's like lots of Matts at Digium. The joke is, you know, like if you say I emailed Matt, nobody knows what you mean. So as Matt F. was alluding to, I used to run the Asterisk project a couple of years ago, handed the reins over to Matt. He's done an absolutely fantastic job the last couple of years. I think he's really nurtured the project and brought it along. And that's really awesome to see the success and to see everybody who is still coming to AstriCon and new people coming to AstriCon makes it very exciting. For the last couple of years, I've been very focused on Digium's cloud efforts, particularly in the R&D side of things. I like all those kinds of bits. If you just came from Leif Madsen's Kubernetes / OpenShift talk, I liked it. It was really cool. So, anyways, those are the kinds of things that we like to kind of play around in the R&D side on, and that's kind of been a lot of fun for us as well, just to kind of look at where that technology space is going.
Great, thanks for those
Matt, do you
introductions.
remember 2 years ago at AstriCon? And there was that famous picture taken. We were going like this. That was some signs
Purely
of things
coincidence.
To come. Yes. That was not selective disclosure.
Almost a tweetable moment, that. So the way we're going to do this is we've got 2 mic runners. We've got lovely Tash somewhere, who's got a microphone there. We've got lovely James over here, who's right close to the mic. And so if you've got a question, raise your hand and they will come to you. Julie, since there's a lot of people here, can I ask you to also keep track of who's raising their hands so we get to everybody as well? First one in the front row, it's only AstriCon veteran, James Bodie.
We're vetoing James.
Is this a dangerous
Yes, sorry,
question?
James, they can't answer that one.
Yep.
1, 2. Yeah, it's on, yeah. So, a warmer into the bank. One of the great things about AstriCon is that it's not just Asterisk, it's the complete ecosystem. And the community side of it is brilliant. That's one of the reasons why there's so many people here. And everybody comes to AstriCon to start off from. So, Tony, this is aimed at you. What are the plans, the great Sangoma plan for AstriCon in years to come? I'm really keen to find out.
Fair question.
I don't foresee that changing. I mean, AstriCon is about the community. It's where the excitement for Asterisk is growing. It's where we talk a lot about what's coming out in Asterisk. Over the years, Free PBX has been very involved in AstriCon. We used to do a Free PBX World event here. So I don't foresee how AstriCon works or the idea of AstriCon changing. Maybe its times will change. Maybe it'll be co-located with another event someday. Not sure. Don't know on that answer. But as far as AstriCon going away or the meaning behind AstriCon really being about the open source and side of Asterisk and it becoming commercialized, I don't see that happening at AstriCon. It's not the clientele and what we're trying to do with AstriCon.
I can see James twitching. I think I can anticipate what he's going to ask. Well, he's made allusions to the open source community. We've got the Free Switch guys here. We've got the Homer guys here.
Yep.
I guess that's part of the question
But
as
just
well.
like Free PBX was a member of AstriCon for years, we did our Free PBX World here, and you guys embraced Free PBX into AstriCon. So, we come with open arms. It's an open source telephony, so Asterisk is a big part of it. But I see Anthony's here. I think 2nd year in a row, Anthony. Which is great from Free Switch. The Homer guys, Fred from Camilio. These are great things. What makes open source telephony so fun.
And Daniel from Camellia as well.
That's right.
Class.
Okay.
So not only do you consider it answered, but answered in the way you want it as well. How about that? Who's got our next question? At the front there, Natasha. Thank you.
What's your plan for the DCAP program? The first one, and if you decide to deprecate it, are the current DCAPs going to be grandfathered into the new program?
DCAP's about Asterisk, so there would be no plans of deprecating that. The training program as a whole will come together. So right now there's a training program at Sangoma. There's one at Digium. That department will come together. They'll offer training, whether it's on phones or Switchvox or Asterisk or Free PBX, those teams will come together, but DCAP itself and what DCAP means isn't going to change.
Any answers from the mats on that?
I liked his answer.
Sounded good to me as well. Yeah. I mean, DCAP, it definitely is. It's got a D in it, right? I guess that's kind of the question. I don't know what that
It could become scat.
I don't know which layer of the question you're.
We'll send you a sticker.
So does the name change? Maybe. I hadn't thought of that yet. That's really a marketing product management decision. I wouldn't think so. There's a lot of, just like we'd never change the name of Asterisk, there's a lot of meaning behind it. I'm not going to go change the name of Dottie to get rid of Digium on it. Digium's a Sangoma company, so.
Okay. All righty, who's our next one? We've got Dan at the front, so James, if you'd like to give a mic to Dan, and then we've got Alex near the back over there.
Maybe not anytime soon, but will Digium, the company, disappear and everything will get put into Sangoma? Because I can only imagine 2 marketing teams and 2 training teams, like you were just saying, at which point Digium isn't really anything anymore and doesn't need to be anything anymore, and it's just Sangoma.
So in the interest of transparency, that decision has not been made. Does the Digium name stay or not? There are companies who've succeeded keeping 2 different names. There's been discussions internally of, do we rename Sangoma to Digium? Do we keep the Sangoma name? Do we do Sanginium or some combination of the 2? Sangomium. We've looked at a lot of different options.
I like Sangomium because it sounds like an element. Right?
With a symbol.
So I will say,
the other direction, DG Goma, sounds like I've got a medical condition.
yeah.
So that's my vote,
Yeah.
but
So we've talked about it way beyond just the marketing team. I don't know if Jim Mackey's here, who runs.
He's flying late.
He's flying in now. So Jim Mackey runs all of marketing for Sangoma and Digium. That's who David now works for. He was a Sangoma employee. When we acquired Digium, Danny and Leslie, who were married, Danny CEO and Leslie was VP of marketing, didn't come with the new company. So Jim stepped in and took over the marketing role at Digium, and there's been a lot of discussions internally between marketing, sales, product management of what do we do with the names. We don't know, to be honest. Yes. Mark, come up here. Mark, come on.
Okay. Thanks.
We got a seat right here for you, Mark.
Saved a seat for you.
Good to see you, buddy.
Okay, so I think we've got. Nice to see you all. That's what happens when you walk in a room. We've got Alex at the back with the next question, please.
Hi. I think this may track Dan's question somewhat and probably ventures into the labyrinth of selective disclosure. But to the extent that Digium is Digium and a Sangoma company, is that, to what degree is that elusive of your approach to future governance? I mean, this is complementary to Dan's question, but notwithstanding names, will Digium continue to exist in Huntsville? Will it continue to have its office there? Will it more or less gather its current shape? To what extent will Digium be constituted in the foreseeable future?
So Huntsville remain a very large operation for Sangoma. We have a very long-term lease there. So we're not going anywhere anytime soon. There's a lot of staff there. So, as far as Huntsville as a large Epic Center, I can tell you, even in the Sangoma world, there are more people out of Huntsville than Sangoma has at any single office. We're a much more diverse around the world offices. We have 2 offices in India, UK, Ecuador, Colombia, where else, Brian?
Canada.
Canada, Cleveland, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Buffalo. We have offices everywhere. So we don't have an office with 100 plus people in it. Our biggest office has maybe 40 people in it.
Can I throw out maybe an addendum to what you're talking about
Yes.
there, Tony? So one of the things that I think really makes this work is that the cultures at the company, while there's some differences between the cultures that were at Digium and Sangoma, there's a lot of similarity between the culture. And so regardless of the name or physical locations, there's a lot of, when you look at an acquisition kind of thing, trying to make sure that companies are going to actually fit together and match well together. We're both open source companies. This is something that we do. This is something that we're used to. And we had a very similar way of looking at the world. So I think, regardless of the name that's on the outside of the building, it's a very, it feels normal, right, coming into work every day.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. I see we've got Alexandra at the back with the microphone there.
I'm on? Yeah, I'm on mic. Well, I'm the top-notch developer I learned today. So I'm the top-notch external developer, distributed 800 commits or something. No, I don't know. Anyway, I have a wild card on that. So I'm unemployed currently. I have a wild card on that. So I have no responsibility to anyone else. So I can ask the tough questions. We talked about the long-term decisions. What about the mid-term decisions? You all have hardware desktop phones. You both have hardware desktop phones. Any decisions on that, which to ditch, or do we see all three lines going on, or what's the story on that?
Product line question.
Yeah, product line questions. So your example is, for example, phones. So Sangoma's got phones. Digium has phones. Is one line going to go away anytime soon? No. Will a line go away someday? Yeah, phones evolve, right? Look at the original line of Digium D-series phones, then they came out with the D6. So as that normal evolution happens over the next few years, that's when you'll see more of that combining of phone lines. But between now and the normal evolution, no. I mean, they're a big chunk of revenue for both companies, and we can't do anything to disrupt that revenue.
Okay, who's got our next question? I noticed, by the way, that so far the questions have been like of a commercial and a corporate nature, and not about Asterisk, the open source project, or free PBX.
I was expecting to sit here and say nothing and let these guys talk about it.
We've got Dan back in the front there.
I'm going to go off the commercial and into Asterisk. How much of a influence will Sangoma / free PBX / anything else that Sangoma is doing have effects on Asterisk plans? Yeah.
Sure. Do you mind if I take this one, Tony?
No, take it.
So, excuse me. As many of you already know, as a project, or at least the Digium employees that are responsible for working on the Asterisk project, because the project is bigger than just the Digium employees that work on it, right? There are a bunch of external people that very regularly work on it, but there are a number of software developers that work full-time on the Asterisk project within Digium, and we already have large commercial customers that we work for, right? We work for the Switchvox team in San Diego. We also have people that have licensing agreements and SLAs with us and things like that that we work for, and we have different conditions that are attached to that work. Now we have the free PBX team to work for as well. So for us, this is another customer that we have to, keep happy, that we meet their needs for and things like that. And it just, for us, it's a natural iteration on a behavior we already have.
And I would add to that, just because you guys wouldn't know that, but for example, the free PBX project has had a commercial agreement with Asterisk and Digium for years on us being able to push features and bugs that we needed. It was something David Hardy and I worked out, 8 years ago. So that influence has always been there. Nobody knew it, but that influence has always been there. And free PBX itself is a very large install base for Asterisk, the largest install base for Asterisk. So we've already kind of had that influence, and it hasn't affected Asterisk. So it would remain the same way it is. Most things free PBX would want is, whether you use free PBX or not, is great for the community, things that we've pushed to get into Asterisk over the years. So I would expect to see that continuing to evolve and work the same way it has.
I think I'd also add to that, Tony, that as Matt pointed out earlier, there's a lot of similarities between the companies and the teams, and free PBX has always relied on Asterisk as that core engine, so we've always tried to push things back upstream and really work with Digium to go ahead and make the product better as a whole. So I don't see that changing.
Sounding very positive. Who is our next questioner? Just there. Tash, can you find that gentleman, please? Thank you.
This question is for Tony. they touched briefly on the phones. So let's ask about the product, FreePBX, and the product SwitchVox. SwitchVox, I think, more competes with the PBExact line, but like any big car manufacturer who has multiple vehicles within their stable, are you going to continue to run both platforms?
Yes. Again, kind of like phones, SwitchVox has got a lot of revenue attached to it, whether it's SwitchVox Premise or SwitchVox Cloud. We can't do anything to disrupt that. What you will see and what we spend a lot of time during due diligence and talking is the sharing of features. So instead of us both building something, so if we want to go and build a next-gen UC client, we're going to build that client to work on both applications. Or the queuing engine that is going in SwitchVox using AirEye. You'll see that become an option in FreePBX. There'll be a lot more sharing of things between the two teams, but they're very different customer bases. SwitchVox is a very turnkey, don't want to tinker with things, don't get under the covers, where FreePBX is, get under the covers, play with it, tinker with it. So completely different customer base.
Okay, thank you for that. Who's our next question person? There's one just there. It's our friend John. Can you see him? See it? And Tash right over the other side. Go ahead, John.
I have a question about the community support forums. Are those going to be combined? The community.asterisk, the community.freepbx, the mailing lists, how is that all going to come together? Is it going to come together?
So FreePBX doesn't have a mailing list, so
You
that
lucky
wouldn't
people.
be. Huh?
What?
Yeah.
I love
Forums,
mailing lists.
I don't think so, mainly because we happen to both use
We both use Discourse. For our forums, but again, it goes back to kind of some comments that we've made earlier of there's very different, there's a lot of similarities between the communities, but there's a lot of differences as well. So we have to keep that in mind as well. While we're using the same technology behind them and we know how to manage that, it's, we have to think about the community.
I think the better answer to that would be, or add on to that will be, we want to go solve the single sign-on so at least the same user works across all the sites. So whether you go to community.asterisk or community.freepbx, or you go to our portal, or you go to one of the Digium portals for something, the first thing to go solve is all of our single sign-ons so that people have access to all sides of the businesses.
Okay, we've got one there. Tash, you seem to be doing most of the running here. Well done. Thank you. That's Alex again.
Yes. Digium and Sangoma also have two POTS interface hardware businesses, TDM, Analog, and the rest. I guess those are the only options, really. I, at least, don't perceive those to be catering to two vastly different market segments or customer bases. What's the future of that?
So I would slightly disagree there. So inside the space here, you guys probably see them as the same. But inside of Sangoma, take our TDM lines of cards. A lot of that is sold in the data business still. Probably a third of the cards, half of the cards we sell are in the data side of the business still. And in the API side, so people who want to connect to the cards using our APIs of OnePipe, so they don't use Asterisk or FreeSwitch. Our cards do support FreeSwitch. I don't think the Digium cards do, last I knew. Maybe
unless
through free
somebody has written
TDM.
something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our cards do support the free TDM stack that FreeSwitch uses. So they are kind of different. And then you get into the next whole line of our cards, which is the Dialogic cards that we bought a year ago. So you get into the Divas and CGs and these 15-year-old cards, and they're completely different beast.
SS7 gateway.
Yes, and yes. So inside the Asterisk community, you see them as overlapping, but we see them as very different. So our cards, the Sangoma, I keep saying ours, I'm sorry for that. The Sangoma cards will remain just because they have another clientele base, and the Digium cards will remain because they're very popular inside of Asterisk. We may decide to promote or push people more to one side. So we may say, if you're using Asterisk, use the Digium cards. You don't need OnePipe on top of it if you use the Digium cards. So that may be a product management positioning decision we make, but they serve different markets.
Thank you. Okay. Who's our next one? Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
Daniel. So, so far, you discussed about joining the efforts together, but somehow still keeping the same products or devices. Have you set like the immediate goal of a collaboration, like a project, to show that the teams now can work together, and that's it? Would be, I don't know, the next Asterisk would be made together by, I don't know, taking from, I don't know, FreePBX, something that you like it or whatever. Do you have such a project, like
I'm just thinking,
showing
let's
on?
throw back to Matt Jordan
That's
first.
what I was doing.
Oh, man.
Video, Matt.
Well, the video is a good example, yeah. So as you guys are probably aware, Asterisk has spent, when did we kick off the SFU work, Matt?
It was 15 was the first major release.
So really it's been 2 releases now. We've been much more heavily investing in video. That's something that at this point is getting, I'd say, really at a point where it could be adopted by FreePBX, and you could probably see some pretty cool things coming into FreePBX that makes use of the video functionality that's been put in Asterisk. Tony's alluded to a number of, and there's been a lot of questions obviously around product sorts of things getting melded together. From just merging companies together, figuring out how you do business together, there is a mountain of systems that drive the businesses. That is, nobody here cares about it, but we care a lot about it. Things that allow us to actually take orders and process orders and put things in boxes and ship them out the door, right? There's lots of opportunities for the teams at both companies to collaborate together on just making the engine work better and run better. And that's actually where probably some of our initial focus is going to be, rather than doing a large kind of massive project that's necessarily externally facing. But as Tony alluded to, there's lots of interesting opportunities in both SwitchVox, PBExact, FreePBX to go take advantage of, with new features and capabilities to start slowly but surely pulling things and making it common across both PBX lines. There's interesting things with phones to start looking at. So there's lots of opportunities for us to start kind of thinking through how do we go provide different features, different capabilities for the different kinds of customers that are coming to us.
And can I add something on real quick?
Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think inevitably in the process that I go through in planning out what targets we want to hit for new major releases and things like that, the FreePBX team, at the very least, they're another group that I have a primary interest in figuring out how we can meet their goals as well, right? And so that's going to be a natural part of the planning process.
And you've historically done that for a lot of years. Not maybe as much as now you might, but it has. And one of the big challenges we came back, one of the first things we came back with, Matt, was performance. Even during due diligence, it was performance. And you start seeing the work you did on PJSIP because we were pushing back on performance. And we're talking hints. We really need to spend some time on hints and subscriptions in Asterisk. It really kills us on dial plan reloads, the way that works. So, FreePBX is kind of, over the years, has gone from this SOHO to this mid-business to we've got enterprises running, 5, 8, 10,000 users on a single box, and they're crippling over themselves with, some of it is FreePBX's design, of course, as 15-year-old design, and some of it is old Asterisk design that we've got to go do some improvements on both teams.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We got one over here with David.
So 2 questions.
James. Go ahead.
One question, are we going to start seeing in the future more commercialization of Asterisk and that there's going to be more modules, but we're going to have to start paying for it? Or is it just going to continue as it is right now with the way open source is and everything's going to be released under a dual license?
So I will let Matt Jordan take that because there's been discussions at Digium for a while on things related to that.
There's always, whenever you're running an open source project underneath the dual license, you're always looking at what makes sense for Digium to produce into the open source community versus do something commercially, right? Now, keep in mind, Asterisk is an open source project. There is literally nothing I can do to prevent anybody in this room from producing a patch to Asterisk and contributing it upstream. That's the beauty of open source. So regardless of whatever I may think, ooh, if we do this, we can make a module, anybody in this room can make a module too and submit it back to the project. So my notion of what should be commercialized versus open source is an opinion of one that does not impact anybody else in this room from using the project however they see fit. That's the beauty of the GPL, right? So let me just say that. At this point in time, we've got no plans to change the way we're doing Asterisk.
Part of it is Asterisk's a framework where FreePBX is more an application.
Sure.
So when we commercialize things in free PBX, it's an application for somebody versus a framework or development kit.
And exactly what Tony just said, I think you've also seen probably in the last couple of years, and Matt, you can talk some more about this too, we don't focus as much on the dial plan applications and the sort of app queue kinds of things. The community does a great job of doing things with those applications still today, but we've really been much more focused on PJSIP, ARI, sort of providing APIs and interfaces to let people go build things and doing the under the hood sort of plumbing, because that's what we think Asterisk provides the most value.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to.
And of course, with this being an open source project, yeah, there are commercial modules in free PBX, but you could build your own if you wanted to, but it seems like a no-brainer to spend a little bit of money and do a shortcut there. David, do you want to come back on that briefly, because I've got a gentleman just there. Have you got anything else to say?
Another question, I'll wait.
Okay, let's go to this gentleman just there, please.
Michael LeBlanc, LeBlanc Communications Group in Connecticut. We are enthusiastic sellers and installers of SwitchVox. We're excited about the merger, really excited. So Sangoma has a nice line of SPCs. I'm guessing those could help us deal with the mess that Digium got us into by creating this soft phone app that makes everyone run around using their phone anywhere they want, at home, not in a lockdown office, that's for sure. So is that something you're working on, giving us more security for our remote installations of all these branch offices and home users? I have another question after that.
Yeah, so it hasn't been looked at yet as far as SPC with SwitchVox. I mean, the Sangoma SPC is agnostic. I mean, it works with anything that's SIP compliant out there. So there'd be no reason it wouldn't work straight up with, no, because it's SIP only. So of course DPMA would, could we write something through SPC to handle DPMA? There's a demand for it and there was a market and we could actually sell more SPCs. Sure, we're entrepreneurs, right? We're capitalists, we want to make money. So, if we can sell to SwitchVox SPCs and there's a need for it, let's build a business case for it.
Okay, and then I've heard, I'm not a programmer, and I wish that we had a better access to good API programmers. That documentation leaves a lot to be desired, at least on the Digium side. Will you be coming together with a better documentation level for everything? And could you create, please, this is the community right here, an ecosystem that lets business guys like me who can't program our way out of a garbage can to get access to people who want to make money so I can create really cool apps for my customers? Is there something like you could do for us?
We should think about that and talk about it.
That's the biz list already.
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to it.
Yeah, there's differences between different kinds of developers too. One of the challenges I think we have always faced is that certain types of developers are attracted to the Asterisk community. And when you're trying to build applications on top of Asterisk, that's usually a very different kind of developer than the one that has traditionally come to the Asterisk community. I think that's one of the nice things actually that the free PBX community brings to the table, is just a very different kind of person who's been attracted to that gives us the ability to kind of point them towards some of the APIs and things that have been developed in Asterisk.
Yep. And just free PBX and how everyone goes in and does a lot of modifications and builds stuff for it. A little exchange place potentially. Yeah, it's worth discussing. There's always the lawyer's hat has to go on of what's the liability to us now if we connect people together, but that stuff can be solved.
Thank you. Let's go back to David for his second bite of the cherry there.
So, real quick question, as far as WAN router goes, is there any plans to sort of morph that into DADI for, at least for Asterisk, they don't have to run anything extra? Because I'm still using a lot of TDM cards.
WAN router?
Yeah, to get rid of that, or sort of make the functionality in DADI so I don't have to run WAN router on top of DADI.
So
that's been one of my issues with the Sangoma cards.
Yeah. Is there a plan? No. And honestly, why? It's a lot of resources for a dying technology. I mean, we can put that resources into things that actually matter to people versus trying to extend out TDM that's dying. The people that want one pipe have it. The people that don't can use straight up DADI cards. Again, Digium cards. We don't care which cards you use. Yeah, Mark. You got a microphone?
Can we borrow that microphone real quick?
You're just speaking to your chest. Nothing awkward about that.
Okay, here we go. Okay. So I'll just say that when we first started doing our Digium cards at the time, of course, we had gotten introduced to Jim Dixon as the Zapata Telephony project, we thought that the TDM card business would last probably 3 to 5 years, and that was in 2001. So yeah, there was an old saying, "Copper may be buried, but it's not dead." But it is kind of starting to get pretty long in the tooth. So yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah. So it just, the investment we'd never get a return on that investment. One pipe's 20-year-old code.
There's probably a few people in the room that hope fax will go in the same way, haven't they?
No, we love fax, please.
Okay, we've got a question down here. It's Tori. Go ahead, Tori.
So what color are you going to adopt, blue or orange?
Both. Haven't you seen? So free PBX was historically orange, and Sangoma was blue. So blue and orange are our colors already.
That was a straight answer to a straight question right there, wasn't it? Okay.
What about the contributor agreement license on Asterisk?
Yep.
So, you might have to do that one? Or you can.
Yeah, from a contract standpoint, Sangoma purchased Digium, everything transfers over. Sangoma's just a shareholder of Digium. So all of your contributor license agreements are still there, they're assignable, they're owned, there's a new owner that owns Digium, but nothing's changed there, and Sangoma happens to use, thanks Michelle, we use the exact same contributor license agreement. We copied it from Digium 10 years ago, so we use the exact same language on ours.
We got Dan coming in for like a fourth one or something. James, can you deal with Dan there?
Mike?
Yeah, statute of limitations.
Now that we've got an awful lot of dev resource within Sangoma, does that mean more dev resource will get potentially assigned to Asterisk in the future? Which means we get more stuff out of Sangoma.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Or as an open source project.
I didn't want you to say that, but yeah, patch is welcome. But
yeah, patch.
no, it's good. For me, Sangoma is now the steward of two very big projects.
Not just for you, Dan.
Not just
for
me,
everybody.
For everyone. Yeah, so I wonder whether or not some of the free PBX team that know Asterisk really well will eventually start working on some Asterisk stuff and be very agile between teams. And
so that would be our hope someday. So if we want to go tackle something big in Asterisk, we can pull off, some of the developers that know Asterisk at Sangoma, and vice versa. We could pull off, and if we want to go tackle something big in free PBX for 3-4 months, if your answer is Asterisk going to get a bigger team full time, I don't think so, but we have a much bigger resource pool, so it's easier to move people on to go do big projects. Does that mean Asterisk's never going to get a bigger team? No. I mean, it's supply and demand, and as Asterisk grows and keeps growing, we have to put more people on it. But as it matures, it becomes, as you know, much harder to do stuff in. It's not as easy as it was when Mark came out with 1.2.
Uploaded from FTP.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go with Michael.
You never lost the source code to Asterisk, right?
Going to go with Michael on the front row now.
My question is for Mark. Mark, why did you sell Digium?
Straight in there.
I guess that's a good question. I don't know that I have a 100% direct answer, but I would say that, and I'll probably speak to this a little bit more tomorrow. I mean, Digium is maybe a little bit like having a child, and I don't have any children, but I used to be one, and so I think I can speak from experience. I still am in many, many ways. My friends that are here with me will attest to that. But essentially, when you first start out, you're trying to create what it is that you want it to be, and as it grows, you get a lot more people that influence, and it sort of becomes its own personality, carries its own personality. And it's been more than 18 years, 19 years now, and I don't know, I guess about 8-9 years ago, I started playing around with airplanes, and that's kind of grabbed my attention, and I